Welcome back to part 2 with Natalie and neurospiciness.
I'm not even entirely sure what accommodations are fully, so that's something that we can really get into. I'm going to write it down on my little paper here. But I kind of want to rewind for a second. You've shared so much cool, helpful, powerful, inspiring things. If someone kind of thinks that they're neurodivergent or they're like, whoo, I have, looked on TikTok or what we're saying is something that they could relate to, what would be like some first steps or resources, or kind of like what might you even say to someone?
Yeah, I think some next steps, if a person feels that they might be neurodivergent, would be to maybe talk to their doctor about it if they have access to a healthcare practitioner. If they do not have access to a healthcare practitioner, I would begin by writing down like instances where maybe they feel they're having challenges, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
it could be kind of like having something like a thought journal um, of maybe when like inconvenient circumstances arise, like your reactions to them or things that maybe triggered something like a meltdown or discomfort, or like how many days you were late that week, to kind
Mm-hmm.
of track like what your symptomology or expression of these different aspects of neurodivergence and how they're manifesting in your life. Because whenever I work with individuals, um, not every person is super comfortable disclosing specifically what their disability is to me, or they may not have even gotten assessed for a specific disability. And so, what I've created in my workspace is an intake form with questions, open ended questions, asking people like different areas they may be struggling in. So, like areas around hygiene, showering, sleep, time management, ability to complete work, get work done, areas of their relationships that they may be struggling in, as well as also their strengths, like what are areas that they're really good in. So I've developed kind of
Mm.
like an intake form or a questionnaire. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to share that with you, because it can also
Awesome.
be even just a really great form for people to follow, to fill out, to maybe reflect on, of like, hey, I'm really struggling in these areas. And then slowly choosing maybe like one or two things that they might want to improve over the next 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
Like, because I think you need to give yourself some time to like slowly get back into a groove of maybe something different or a new routine or something else you're trying. So for example, if for me and my team, I have developed something called self-care goals. And
Mm.
self-care goals have to be in the format of a SMART goal. So it needs to be specific, measurable, actionable, um, relevant, and time bound,
Mm.
right? So there needs to be kind of a time limit, needs to be a specific goal. You have to measure it, and it needs to be something you can act out and relevant to anything in your life that you want to change during that time period. So
Mm-hmm.
for example, if my self-care goal, because I know that it causes me a lot of distress to be late, is to maybe develop a morning routine and to like wake up at a specific time. That also means I'm going to have to put my planning cap on, which people with executive dysfunction really struggle with
Mm-hmm.
planning, because that's all of your prefrontal cortex, right? All of your decision making planning, that is just completely hijacked by the instant gratification monkey that lives inside our brain. Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, so taking some time to plan out, okay, if I want to wake up at this time, what time do I need to go to bed? That means I need to set two alarms, right? An alarm that's going to help me like plan my bedtime routine, and an alarm that's going to help me plan my morning routine. So that's like the first very specific step.
Mm-hmm.
And then let's say I want to have a smooth morning. That means I need to have like a good breakfast ready or something, or that I need to time my walk with my dog, right? Like, my dog makes me late a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have pets, right, like even planning and getting down specific and planning those specific things. So like even just making that one adjustment of like wanting to get to work on time is going to take some planning of your nighttime routine and your morning routine,
Mm-hmm.
and making a list of all of the elements involved. So that might also mean that to start that successfully next week, right, on Monday, that means this weekend I might need to do some meal prepping of overnight oats if I want to have a breakfast, or let's say maybe I have pre-made smoothies, or I might have a Cliff Bar or something, a cereal bar that I can take on the go.
Yeah.
I also try to make my life super easy. So like things like instant coffee or iced coffee that I buy at the grocery store. Another thing that I've eliminated is like going to the grocery store to shop.
Mm-hmm.
I just order my groceries now. I don't go, and that is again a privilege I have, that I can order. Sometimes it ends up cheaper though. I
Yeah.
will say that, because you get those like Uber Eats deals where it's like 50% off your entire grocery order or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I also tend to get the same thing like
Yeah.
every week, because I'm a creature of habit now. So like it just makes anything that takes a load off of my brain and thinking process to make my mornings easier is what I do.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds very relaxing to me. Like that makes sense. And then it also is really like tangible action steps, things that you can begin to do to support yourself, which I
Mm-hmm.
think is so needed. And then I know for ADHD people, I don't know about all neurodivergent people, that that's really what can be needed. So this is a good point that I'd love to ask you about. There was something that you mentioned in a TikTok about how sometimes therapy isn't, I mean, this is not exactly what you said, but so I'm not like I'm paraphrasing badly, but essentially that there can be gaps in what therapy can do to help neurodivergent people, because we need to get in the skill building, the action steps, like a lot of what you just mentioned. I mean, my experiences, like my therapist probably wouldn't really do that with me. It's more about processing feelings and emotions and maybe setting a goal. But can you tell us a little bit more? You had said in this TikTok that therapy often lacks the skill building component that neurodivergent people need.
Yes. And I totally believe that everyone can benefit from therapy. I'm not saying
Yeah,
like, oh, like throw away your therapist and come meet with
totally.
me like an EF coach, right? Like that's not at all what I'm saying. It's just that in my 10 years of working with neurodivergent individuals, um, I'm often a supplement to their therapy,
Mm-hmm.
because they're not getting their needs met around skill building in therapy. And sometimes the conversations that I'm having in coaching is helping the client also advocate for themselves in a therapy setting, right? So, like, if they feel like their therapy is lacking, we'll kind of talk a little bit about that and say, like, well, let's write a script down of maybe a few points you might want to bring up to your therapist if
Mm-hmm.
you're feeling like you're walking away with a subpar experience,
Mm-hmm.
because you're allowed to speak up and say, hey, this isn't working for me. Therapists actually love to receive feedback from their clients, and really encouraging the people I work with to advocate for themselves in that way, and giving them the skills and the language to then apply it themselves in those spaces. And I've helped tons of people um, renegotiate what their relationship goals are with their therapist, right? So they're like therapeutic relationship and what that looks like. is going to change and evolve over time. The goals that you set at the beginning of therapy, if you've been in therapy for 3 years, should not be the same goals you're working on 3 years later. You should be having consistent check-ins with your therapist every quarter, right? Every 3-4 months to see if there is growth there, and challenging your therapist to be, to give you that kind of critical feedback. Whenever I work with my therapist, I'm like, look, I am a very, like, I need specific language. Just give it to me straight.
Yeah.
It's my vibe with my therapist. I'm like, I want to get to work. But I think it took me a long time to get there, right? A lot of therapy for me was like emotional processing,
Yeah.
that I've experienced in life. And therapy can be great for that. But especially for my clients that have ADHD and or autism, because you can have both, they oftentimes are like, I honestly don't know what the point of therapy is. And that kind of made me like question, like, what, like, I know that therapists are trained to work with people on the spectrum and people with ADHD, but why is it that every single ADHD or autistic person I speak with is having this not necessarily negative experience, but walking away not knowing what they're even doing in therapy? Because there were a lot of times where I felt like that too. And I had to like kind of talk to my therapist and say, hey, like, I'm not getting better. Like, what are we doing here? And having those conversations. And I think that just like coaches need to have, and business practitioners need to have a scope of practice, therapists also should understand when to refer a client out and know their scope of practice, because they might not be the best therapist equipped to work with someone that has ADHD or autism.
Right.
Not every therapist is made the same. Most therapists actually really, kind of focus on a very specific issue or a very specific type of client. They might be really great with clients that have anxiety and really great with patients that might have depression. Another thing that is really challenging is that, especially if you're diagnosed or don't yet have a diagnosis for ADHD or autism, you're often have gone through your entire life being misdiagnosed. Like, I've been misdiagnosed with anxiety and depression and bipolar. Like, I had like multiple diagnoses kind of like thrown at me, and then kind of going back to a CPTSD diagnosis and a ton of other things. I'm super open with my like mental health journey. So I will throw out like just anything about me. I'm super open and honest about it.
Same.
I think that a lot of people will sometimes go through life having been misdiagnosed, and because they were working with a practitioner that didn't tell them, hey, this is outside of my scope of practice, let's refer you out. Or that they did maybe feel they were equipped, but there was just a miscommunication because the client wasn't saying that like they needed help with different things.
Yeah, you mentioned so many good things, and I think what sticks out to me is, of course, therapy is awesome and amazing and great, and everybody should see a therapist and go, please do. And then sometimes it can feel, for some people, especially if they're neurodivergent, like maybe something's like lacking, or maybe they're not really understanding what they're doing, what their goals are, and to speak up about that, talk about that, right? Bring it up, talk, give feedback. And it also spins into like why I think coaching is amazing and coaching is good, because some of the things that I've been trained to do coaching wise is to focus on like goals or behavior change, and to have like support and action steps and accountability around that. And so it's not trying to process every single emotion or diagnose something or treat something. It's just literally like some of those core things that I think are helpful. So anyways, that's just like a side tangent, and saying that I'll use myself, for example, someone with ADHD, like I really needed help with skill building about like being on time and what can I do, and So those aren't things I would really like talk about in therapy. To me, that hasn't been my experience. I mean, I will say that one of my last therapists, it was really beneficial. I was changing so much, and I said, I want education. I want to know what these things are, what these things mean, like what I'm doing, because that's really helpful for me. Then secondly, like I want coping skills. I want to make this huge toolbox of coping skills so that I understand what is happening within me, and then here's what I can do. Boom, 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 boom. And it was so helpful.
And can I just say something about that too? And why I also think coaching is so powerful is because, like you said, coaching is about building actionable plans, setting realistic goals,
Yeah.
and having that accountability component. There are specific learning outcomes tied to coaching if you're working with a good coach, right?
Yeah.
Specific learning outcomes. I think it's also, you know, sometimes in like shorter form therapy, kind of maybe if we have any college students listening, a lot of the therapy you will find on a college campus, or even like within like a hospital setting, kind of like a rehab center, things like that, is solution focused therapy. And I'd say coaching is actually very similar to that, because it's like you're finding solutions. Coaching and coaches are also information givers, whereas therapists are like, will help process things with you, and
Yes.
they might do a little bit of teaching, but coaches will go in and teach you something, or give or show you a new skill, or show you how to implement a new tool, or how to use an app, to find a solution for an area that you're struggling in. Will process all, different types of obstacles that might, and solutions to those obstacles that you might be experiencing. So they're giving you tools, they're helping you create a toolbox. Whereas I think, and there is, mindset coaching and things like that too, that kind of help with the processing of your like self-concept and things like that. But in therapy, it is a lot of processing, maybe a little bit of information giving that the therapist is giving you. However, it, like, as therapists, because I've been in like, therapy classes, you're told like not to give an answer, to help the client find the answers themselves, and to give them space for that. But when you're working in a coaching set, you kind of don't have time for that. You have a limited number of sessions. And so it's like, oh, you're experiencing this. All right. Like, also
solution focused
practices. I think also a lot of coaching stems from actual like addiction counseling too. And many of you can look up what the stages of change are. Individuals who are hiring a coach or working with a coach are at that stage of contemplation already. So the stages are like pre-contemplation, contemplation, action, maintenance, and then relapse. Like, hopefully, like, you'll prevent relapse, but everyone makes mistakes, right? So in, let's say, like, behavior change, let's say you want to be better at your time management, and you hire a coach, like, you're already at the contemplation stage where you have decided there is a need for you to change in a specific area. Whereas in therapy, you might hang around that pre-contemplation stage where you might not necessarily think there is a problem or that you need to change an area.
Totally. Ooh, I have been thinking about the stages of change so much, and how, looking back or looking at a lot of online content, that people are not understanding or even thinking about that. When someone pressures someone into joining something when they're literally not at that level of change, they're in pre-contemplation, like maybe, but not really, kind of, or lower. And then, pressuring them into joining some program or course, or giving them all these kind of like, fear of missing out, and you're going to save $1,000 and blah, blah, blah. Things that in my mind, I think is overriding, it can temporarily override where someone's at. And then at the end of the day, it's like they're maybe not going to take action. They don't show up, which is their right, because they're not ready for change. And so that's, I could go on about this forever, but I'm so glad that you mentioned it. And then I've seen so many like shitty coaches on Instagram be like, I only take people who do this, and I only take people who work like that. And you need to be ready to do this, that. That they basically are saying that they can only support someone who is like at peak ready to change and will do everything perfectly. That they actually can't support someone at many different levels. Or they take it personally, like they're being wronged and offended that someone's not at a place to change, you know. So there's so much to get into, but I'm really glad that that you mentioned that one.
Yeah, no, I think you talked about fear of missing out, and I want to take that back to how marketing plays into people that might struggle with impulse control, right?
Oh. I mean, that is me. I mean, I'm just going to say, and maybe people, sorry to interrupt you, but maybe people who are listening, I have gotten so many DMs of people saying like, oh my gosh, I spent so much, or I was so excited and getting ready to do this, and I just signed up for this, or I blah, 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 blah. And then they feel guilt and shame about it. They feel like it was a horrible mistake. And it's not necessarily like they're blaming the person who sold them. It's just really, they genuinely were like there for it and caught up in it and then feel badly after. So I will just personally say I have really, really, really spent money that I shouldn't have because of my own impulsiveness or ADHD excitement, and because of the ridiculous marketing. Or I chewed off more than I could and really like bought into so much of the marketing and was like, here we go. And then it just wasn't realistic. So as someone with impulse control and ADHDness, I'm like, oh my gosh, let's talk about this.
Yeah, so I do want to share that like that the marketing is working, right? Like the marketing as a field and marketing as its own kind of like, I guess, own animal. Like if it's having people buy things for the sake of spending money, like that means that the marketing is working, right? Like the in capitalistic societies like the one we live in here in America, like everything is fair game. Almost everything is fair game, right? And that means that it's working. I think how do you, like the conversation we should kind of be having of these like buyer beware like type of conversations is around like how can we set boundaries around our and coping skills around our impulse control issues, because I also like the amount of times I've been $20,000 in debt is pretty ridiculous.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like,
same.
oh, I did it to myself.
Same. Like, wait, I promised myself. How am I back here again?
Yes, like it happened when I was like super early in my like early young adulthood. It happened in my mid 20s. It like, you know, and then with the economy, like you kind of rack up maybe a little bit of credit card debt again.
Yeah.
Like it happens, right? It happens. But it's like we live in a culture that like promotes kind of like FOMO in all of its marketing, right? Like everything is being part of an exclusive club. And this actually goes back to like colonial times. Like it actually like the marketing even around like these special like all boys clubs and like, you know, the Freemasons and everything being exclusive, right? Being part of a special club. And that's what some of these like coaching programs kind of almost make you feel like you're part of this exclusive magical club that is somehow gonna be like once you're there, like all your problems are gonna melt away.
Oh, yes.
But
You're gonna crack the quantum code and soar. Soar, baby.
You're gonna collapse time and enter a new reality tomorrow.
Hey,
50 pounds thinner tomorrow if I just believe it, right?
Yeah.
No. I think some of like things that I had to really have some self-acceptance around was like around boundaries that I was going to be having
Mm-hmm.
around my finances,
Yeah.
boundaries around my finances. And I think that like some things that have protected me are things like having like multiple bank accounts and
Mm-hmm.
structuring my finances in a way where things have become very automated for me. So I have like an account where like all my like bills and rent go. I have a savings account, I have a checkings account, and I have an additional like bills emergency fund account. So I have four like bank accounts, and then I have my like investment accounts, and those I don't touch, I don't really pull from. And so all of my I have everything so that my direct deposit is like kind of putting money
Mm-hmm.
into those different accounts automatically
Do it for you. Mm-hmm.
where it's being done for me. And what that means is that like when I look at the account I'm allowed to spend from,
Yeah.
have
Wow.
that disposable income that I know of like, oh, I got like paid this week. That means I have X
Mm-hmm.
amount of dollars to spend.
Yeah.
No, like that's gone like, and I kind of like have made it so that those other accounts, like my rent account, that is an account that I never ever pull from. Like,
Mm-hmm.
because I know that if I pull from it and I forget to put the money back in there, then my rent check is going to bounce,
Yeah.
and I don't want to get that 3-day notice sent to me. Like, so I think having those types of systems set up so that the impulse buying is
Yeah.
almost kind of like taken away from me, because, you know, okay, but Natalie, how is that going to stop me from just pulling money out of my savings account or my emergency fund? Well, it's like having a limit or a fee that, like, if you pull out this many times or this amount of money, like your account gets locked or you get like a service
Mm-hmm.
charge or something like that.
Yeah.
Because so giving myself a tax, like a spending tax if I pull from my savings, right? And then having things in like an investment account, right? That I'm not checking every day. I only invest in things that are like S&P 500 or different
Yeah.
types of investments that aren't necessarily like day trading, because that's also like dopamine, like if I was
Yeah.
day trading, that would also probably be very dangerous because that's gambling.
I'm like, yeah, about S&P 500s and stuff. I need to work on my investments. So I'm like, right, yes. But I will say, so we're saying like, yes, the marketing's terrible. I mean, it's really bad. Like it can be manufactured completely, that you go on this process and this funnel of feeling really hyped up and feeling like you need this and it's once in a lifetime. And then also look at how much you're going to make if you do it, or you're going to heal everything spiritually, blah, blah, blah. But we also, of course, need self-responsibility or ways that you can set boundaries for yourself, that you won't spend the money, or even like, I'll say for myself, ADHD wise, impulsivity wise, giving myself a buffer of time. So even if I have a savings account that's at a bank that I have to actually go to, I'm not just going to like, yeah, screw it, transfer it over kind of thing. So, lots of things you can do. And to give yourself those boundaries around impulsivity is helpful, not storing your cards like in on your phone on Instagram shopping, or lots of different stuff that you can do to put the boundaries in place. And yes, the marketing can be terrible. And you look back and you're like, what was I on? And I'm like, it's almost like you were on a drug. You were on a high.
Yeah, you were on a hot. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that for some neurodivergent people, I'd say more of the impulse control really kind of happens or stems in people that might, people that might experience any type of hypomania or mania, or people that struggle with impulse control, such as people with ADHD, because in
Mm-hmm.
individuals that I've worked with that experience more like either depression or who are on the spectrum are individuals who do take time to really kind of like think through a purchase or think through a
Yeah.
decision, and then we'll go, especially if it's something they're interested in, they'll really kind of like really question like, how is this gonna benefit me? Do I really want this? Like, so I think understanding your own neural profile is really important to know
Mm-hmm.
whether you struggle with this or not.
Mm-hmm.
Um, like I know people who don't struggle with impulse control in this way, and maybe struggle with like actually wanting to spend on themselves, and
Yeah.
that comes from like feelings of worthiness, or that might come from like overthinking and spending too much time in the research process, where then they never end up doing anything
Yeah.
that might be beneficial for them, right? They're
Yeah.
too much in the pre-contemplation stage and never step towards something that might be beneficial or even just a treat for them, and they know, like, so it's kind of these
Mm-hmm.
two polarized experiences, right? But I think the toxic marketing within the coaching industry really targets those people that struggle with impulse control.
Yeah.
And it also, like, a lot of the marketing is also very like triggering of people's trauma or pain
Yeah.
points, where it's like it might be kind of talking about a person's story or their testimony. I notice a lot of, like, especially spiritual coaching is like evangelism without God. Like,
Mm-hmm. Oh, wow. I have not heard that term before, but holy crap, is that perfect.
yes, because it's a lot of these like spiritual manipulation tactics of like you're sharing your testimony, and it's going to trigger people relating with it and relating with that pain, because
Yeah.
you're essentially marketing and creating trauma porn for people to
Oh
consume.
my
And
God,
then,
it's so true. I went
yeah,
from struggling waitress to doing this, that, the trauma porn of like, if you're in this place, and oh my gosh, and I remember my landlord called me and I cried and I said, never again, and la 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 la. You know, it's, oh my God, it's so true.
and it's like it's kind of their like elevator evangelism pitch,
Yeah.
right? Like, but the thing that they're evangelizing you to buy into is their coaching program that costs
Yeah.
10,000.
Wow. Woo! We need to do a whole episode on that.
Yes.
And evangelism without God, but then like their course or coaching is essentially the doctrine. So yeah,
They're their own gods. Yeah.
they're their own gods. Yeah, wow. Well, we've talked about so many cool and amazing and helpful things. Do you have any resources or I know you mentioned that amazing account, Domestic Blisters, but do you have any other resources or places that you would tell people like, hey, you have to check this out? I will also link that form that you mentioned as a resource to people. So thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Additional resources. I mean, my DMs are open for anyone that ever wants to just kind of chat, or they have an interest. I try to, if you work with me, my pricing is very fair and very reasonable for what I do.
So people
Um,
can work with you, like you work for a school doing this work professionally, but people can work with you privately
People
in
can work privately, yeah.
executive
Mhm.
functioning brain. I know you call yourself the brain coach, which is awesome.
Yes, so people can work with me, but I mean other like resources. There's so many blogs. I feel like I'm gonna have to send you a
Yeah.
list that you can provide links to. I think that that's what's gonna be the best thing for me to do.
Well, thank you so much, Natalie. We'll have to do this again. Thank you for sharing your experience and your wisdom. And everyone, please go check Natalie out and let us know your thoughts on this podcast. And we'll definitely need to do this again.
Thank you for having me. It was so good spending this time with you.